Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Mike Shelby.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Out Front with Mike Shelby. A little bit early here on this Tuesday because I got some stuff to do this afternoon. But listen, we're going to break down a few more things on this No Kings protest, and I want to talk about cultural appropriation and some other things I see going on, and also take your questions. All right, let's go ahead and get into what I got today. So on Saturday, by the way, everyone should have gone to these protests. If you didn't, I highly encourage you to go to the next one. There's about one a month that Indivisible does, and they did one for May Day and for Labor Day, and we had protests here. There's protests all throughout the week. I mean, there's somewhere between like 40 to 50 protests a week. Maybe not in your area, but maybe. One reason why everyone should go to these things is I learned a lot about the left in my county. My county went plus 25 for Trump. We're a solid red county. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to one of the guys there complaining about how difficult it is to get any left-wing movement going. He was affiliated with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, PSL, which is I consider a far-left political party. These are not your run-of-the-mill Democrats. These are actual socialists, and in some cases, actual communists. And of course, I forgot who said this, but I've heard it repeated that a communist is a socialist with a rifle. And that's the differentiator. So at any rate, I picked up some swag there, and you can see on the screen I don't even know what I'm going to do with these, but they gave me some stickers and anti-Trump stickers. Listen, it was very beneficial for me to go there and talk to people and see what they're thinking. And one of the guys, all right, so listen, my area is actually pretty hostile to these protests, not to the point of violence, but they rolled coal on us. We had these diesel pickups driving up and down the street and revving their engines and producing a plume of exhaust. Brought a tear to my eye, literally and figuratively. And, and we got flipped off and people yelling at us and showing us their MAGA hats and everything, which, again, I was not unhappy to see, of course. But I'll tell you, these signs, number one, they're pretty big. I mean, they're pretty nice signs. And, we have friends everywhere. I showed this to some of the folks in my political circle here, and everyone said, oh, that sounds like a threat. And apparently it's from some Star Wars show. I don't know. Another Marvel movie. But look, these things look pretty nice. And they're professionally printed from some shop in Northern California. And, I look at this and I say, when have I ever been to any conservative protest or rally? And I've been going to them for many years. I started by going to the Glenn Beck's 9/12 rally back in 2012. And in DC. And of course that was fun. I've been to a bunch of Trump rallies and stuff, but I've never seen this level of organization where you get there, you check in at the table. They've got, hang on, give me 2 seconds. Look, they have these bandanas printed up and you could just go there by the table and get some stuff. No Kings bandana for free. Pretty nice, lots of money obviously going into this thing. And you get there and they told you exactly where to stand and how to line up. And they had a chant leader. They try to get the chants going. And it's super annoying. But the people that say, show me what democracy looks like. And then the crowd answers, this is what democracy looks like. And of course, very few people actually knew the chants. I know the chants because I've been to enough of these left-wing protests that I have recited them by heart at this point. And a couple other things. What do we do when democracy's under attack? Stand up, fight back. That was another one. And nobody, like you, just, I don't want to call them normie Democrats, but they're like, these were not indoctrinated socialists, not where I live. There's a handful of them who did know the chants. These were like 75-year-old boomer grandma and grandpa who hate Trump, just boomer liberals, to use a turn of phrase, shit libs, who obviously didn't know anything about these farther left chants. Anyway, they're becoming more popular. Listen, I had a good time, and I learned a lot about about the local left. And there was one party here. It's a revolutionary leftist party. I didn't even know they were here in my county, but they are. They're basically recruiting. And, oh yeah, another thing, they're handing out, this guy was walking down the line of protesters, handing out a flyer with a QR code on it. And we punched in the QR code, and it goes to a Linktree page. And it has all these links to all these Democrat groups, and there's PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and a bunch of other links. And I found a community organizing NGO that I didn't really or I guess a community organizing group I didn't know was in my county, but it turns out they're actually pretty involved in doing all this social justice and community organizing and mobilization for protests. So you should be going to these things because it's pretty low hanging fruit. It's pretty low risk environment. It's not like you literally just show up. It's not even infiltration of a protest. You literally just go there and stand around. And what I do when I go to these things, I just pretend everyone there is a Trump supporter, and I treat everyone like I would treat another Trump supporter. So can be pretty talkative, and I was just chatting up the people who were sitting next to me, and it wasn't a friendship, but there was some level of rapport being built. And I thought they were fairly nice people, honestly. I disagree with their politics, but they were like fairly not extremely misguided, low information voters. But other than that, they're pretty friendly. So it's not even an adversarial environment. Just walk down there and again, it's not really infiltration. Just wear something that a turbo normie would wear and walk down there and talk to people. At any rate, one of the things that I did, I got there early, like 30 minutes early, and there's already people lined up out there. And so I went by the volunteer table and kind of checked in and asked to volunteer. I said, hey, is there anything that I can help do? And probably midway through the protest, this guy ended up giving me a clicker, like a little counter, a tally counter, the one where you press the little button and so I walked up and down and counted everyone, which is how I know exactly how many people were at the protest. And I haven't seen, it really didn't even get a lot of news coverage here. I did not see a single reporter. I wasn't there for the whole time, but it's not like there was breathless news coverage of this event. And also haven't seen any official count. But the official count, they said 7 million. It's obviously inflated. Obviously not 7 million people turned out. Substantially lower than 7 million. But you just have to operate on a key assumption. It is safe to assume that no protest was overcounted. It's safe to assume that if they're going to make an error, they're going to be overcounted. So that right there should tell you the 7 million numbers inflated. And you can do the math and you can say, well, if there's a 5 to 10% overcount times 2,700 events, realistically, you're looking at 250,000 to 500,000 people in just an overcount. At any rate, a couple of independent people said there's like maybe 5 to 6 million, something like that. I still think maybe that's too much, but I'm not going to quibble because I don't know for sure. At any rate, it is very important to understand. I saw a lot of people on X, a lot of conservatives on X say, well, what did they accomplish? And, it cost $300 million to put on a protest. And treating this thing like it's in one way, yes, it is just another protest. It did not accomplish anything. Remember, power, the definition of power, is anything you do that imposes your will or imposes your will on others or forces them to accept conditions that you want. And this protest had very little power because it didn't impose its will on anyone. But remember, there's three things going on with these protests. And it's not just a protest. It's part of a much larger strategic picture. And there are fundamentally three things that they wanted to get out of this protest. Number one is they want to encourage Democrats to take a harder line stance against Trump. And they do that, and this is somewhat optics, but when you're a Democrat politician or you're on a staff and you turn on the news and you see hundreds of thousands of people out in the streets protesting against Trump, and you hear the protest organizers saying Democrats need to do more to combat the fascist Trump, there is a level of support there, and you'll say, you know what, maybe we will take a harder line stance against Trump because this is obviously what the rank and file wants. And I think that's why we're in the shutdown. Last time Schumer rolled over, this time he didn't. I think Democrats got burnt on that first continuing resolution, and they went over the edge this time because they knew that they were going to be supported by people who did not want a Trump budget or the CR being passed. So that's the first thing, is getting Democrats to take a much harder line stance, showing them that there's quote unquote grassroots support to do that. The second thing is showing vulnerable Republicans. If you side with Trump, we are going to vote you out in the midterms. And maybe there's some level of success there, but these first two things, those are explicit goals of the protest. This is what the indivisible people are saying. Push Democrats to do more, push Republicans to do less, or at least not side with Trump. The third thing, I'll get to the third thing in just a second. And it has to do with the midterms. But remember, this is not just a protest. This is part of a color revolution movement that is being built. And when we get to the latter phases of this color revolution, as we get into 2027 and 2028, I know that's still a long way away. I think for some people, it's so far away that there's no sense of urgency. I have a very strong sense of urgency because having read about a dozen or so of these color revolutions, I know how successful they can be. And I also know that conservatives and conservative leaders and Republican Party leaders can be pretty feckless. So you'll excuse me if I'm not as optimistic as you are about this color revolution not being successful or being defeated. We'll see. At any rate, remember, we're in the building blocks stages. This is the organizing phase of this thing. They're still organizing these networks, building the political and social infrastructure and building out the communications and everything they're going to need. They're tackling the midterms first. Don't even worry. I think some people were wrong. Some people said, oh, this protest was intended to kick off this big color revolution and force Trump from office. No, that's coming later. That's not now. This protest is to do the two things I just told you. That's what they want to do. And to continue building the infrastructure heading into the midterms, because they're setting up a much larger narrative here through these protests. Being that this is actually a color revolution movement, which by now should be no surprise and certainly not news to anyone, this means, A, that you can play a role in this. You should be playing a role in this. And your role right now is to be taking a survey of your local political landscape, identifying the groups, identifying the NGOs, identifying the funding sources. And you can talk about George Soros and Arabella at the big national level. That's not what I'm talking about. Of course, some of that money may be flowing to your local area. But look at your local financiers who may be promoting or facilitating or funding some of these things. That's a piece of information that would behoove you to know. And I'm telling you, when we get to 27 and 28, you're going to look back and you're going to say, I should have done more in 25 and 26. So do not let these opportunities pass you by. Take it from me firsthand. I know my area really well, and I still learned things at this protest, and I still picked up things. You know why? Because I never see these people. I have zero contact with more or less zero contact with Democrats and leftists in my county. And they are relatively few. But like I said, there was that one revolutionary political party that I didn't even know was in the county that they're trying to build up. So you'll probably learn something too. And take all the literature and take the handouts and whatever people will give you. Take, if there's tables, a lot of times there are groups that will table. Actually, I got a report back from a couple folks in Houston, and there's a group down there called, well, it's a national group. It's called Refuse Fascism. And Refuse Fascism was started by members of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And so pretty much anytime you see Refuse Fascism, just assume that there are RCP or some communist members there, Communist Party members. Even though there's a handful, there's Revolutionary Communist Party, there's Revolutionary Communists of America, there's Revcom USA, Revolutionary Communists. There's maybe one or two others. You should know that they're in your backyard, in your neighborhood. All right. Jay Gannon says, Gen Z men will block the color revolution. They've had enough and have nothing to lose. The old boomers are as out of fashion as APAC. Well, listen, I keep hearing this stuff. And even I saw the chest thumping on social media, and I would say, guys, don't overlook this. You need to treat this seriously because this is a color revolution. You go back. When I first connected the dots, and I've said this before, I'll just say it briefly. I was reading about the very first classic color revolution in 2000, where you actually had external funding sources and the National Endowment for Democracy and the International Republican Institute and other U.S. NGOs getting involved. And that 2000 Serbian revolution, the color revolution, got its roots as far, maybe farther back, but at least as far back as 1998. So this is something that they were building for 2 years before they actually pulled the trigger, and they pulled the trigger on the color revolution after the October 2000 elections, where Milosevic, basically he did steal the election. So remember, these things take years to build up, and we're in this building phase, the organizing cycle right here. When we get to 28, you're going to look back and probably going to say, I wish I would have done more. At any rate, I keep hearing, and I see the chest thumping, all these, all the people with their AR-15s, and they say, we're not going to let communism win here, and we're going to, and what do these people do during the COVID lockdown? Sure, there were some armed protests, but guys, all the chest thumping is pointless. It is absolutely pointless. It makes you feel better. It does nothing to solve the problem. All you're doing is saying, hey, at some point in the future, we're all going to rise up, and guys, typically that doesn't happen. There's a really good book called The War of the Flea. And in that book, I think it's John, that guy's last name is Tabor. He says there is oftentimes there's a sentiment among people that say things will get bad enough and then we'll put an end to it. And he says historically that just doesn't happen. Historically, that's not how things happen. Historically, humans adapt to their environment. And things get bad, and you adapt to worsening conditions. And you just look at what's happened over the past 100+ years. Things have gotten progressively worse for Americans, and yet we're still seeing the 50-year-old, 60-year-old boomer con say, we're going to put an end to it. Maybe Gen Z will. But saying Gen Z will, you're not going to just meme that into existence. You have to take concrete steps, and everything starts with intelligence. It's just like all these guys running around in the woods wearing OCP, multicam, and they got their jungle boots, and they got, whatever, this new gear, and they got all these fancy optics for their rifles and all that stuff. And if you're not leading with intelligence, you're setting your future self up for failure, because intelligence informs us of our battle space. And it doesn't matter if your battle space is trying to get a good sheriff elected in your county, or responding to flooding or a tornado or hurricane or earthquake or a wildfire or something worse. You've got to, in the Army, we call this stuff IPB, Intelligence Preparation of the Battlefield. I've taken that IPB doctrine and said, look, let's take what works from the Army for us in a community-centric scenario here, and let's build an area study. And that's what your area study is. So all these people running around in the woods with zero area study, zero area intelligence they've developed, really are setting themselves up for failure in the future because they're playing chess on a board that they don't understand. They can't see the other player's pieces, and that's a really good way to lose a chess match when you're trying to move your pieces around and you don't know where the other person's pieces are, your opponent's pieces are. At any rate, let's get into this third reason here why we're seeing these protests. So anytime you see protests this early, remember the color revolution is probably not coming until after the midterms, probably in 2028, maybe before. And I say that just based on history. There are 9 classic color revolutions. 6 of the 9 classic color revolutions coincided with national elections, which case, in most cases, I think they probably were all stolen. And then you have this remaining 3. And the remaining 3 classic color revolutions that did not occur, or did not coincide with national elections. One happened because the prime minister was assassinated. The assassination of that prime minister triggered that color revolution. And the other 2 were expansion of executive authority, illegal expansion of executive authority. So there's a case to be made that maybe we don't wait for 2028. Maybe we don't wait for a failed or contested election in 2028 for this color revolution. Maybe it happens before, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So the biggest reason right now, as we look towards next year, a little over a year away, the 2026 midterms, is they are building the largest get out the vote voter mobilization database in U.S. history. Anytime you go to mobilize.us or you go to any of these websites and you fill out that contact form, you put your name and your email address and your phone number, that is all going into a database because they want to engage you. They don't want you to just get out and vote. They want to turn you into an activist, as a matter of fact. I just signed up for this thing. It's called Empower. And it is an app that you put on your phone. And it basically turns you into a community organizer. You can import all your friends lists. And then you can send out these text messages. And apparently they've got these templated text messages and emails that you can send. And the whole goal is to get millions of people who may otherwise maybe they'll vote in the midterms, but to turn them into activists and community organizers and get them agitating and organizing around these issues so that when they go into the midterms, they have a massive army of volunteers to go do things like door knocking for politicians. Remember, face-to-face contact like door knocking is the most effective way to get people to vote. Either a friend engages you and says, Tuesday morning, I'm going to pick you up and we're going to go vote. Or sign up, get your mail-in ballot, however that works, and we're going to fill it out together and we're going to send it off. But I'm going to make sure that you vote. And now when you've got 1 million people doing that with one person, now you got 2 million people doing that. Well, when you've got 5 or 10 million people doing that, now all of a sudden you got 10 or 20 million people doing this. So this is all aimed at the midterms. This is about maximizing voter registration. It's about maximizing voter turnout, getting people to early voting, getting people to election day to vote. And this is part of the big strategic message that they're building, because this strategic message will be, we've had the largest voter mobilization, or excuse me, largest voter registration drive in U.S. history. This is what they're going to say. We've registered more voters than in any other election cycle. We've had the highest turnout. We've gotten more people to vote than in any other election cycle. And Democrats are still probably going to lose the midterms. And so they're going to build up this massive narrative. Like this, there's just all this massive opposition to Trump and massive opposition to Republicans. And they're going to go into the midterms and they're still not going to win the House back. And now what are they going to be left with? They're going to be left with this narrative that the Trump administration stole the midterms. And how do they do it? Through mid-decade redistricting, because there are, I don't know, I think we're maybe up to 37 Republican House seats now, plus 37. If the current redistricting efforts go through, if they survive the courts and they actually do end up applying to the 2026 midterms, Republicans are going into that with they will have redrawn the lines of these reliably Democrat districts, redrawn the lines and created a reliably Republican district, and Republicans will be plus 37 if all these current plans go through. This is something that Robert tracks with us here at Forward Observer. We have the Supreme Court talking about whatever section, is it section 2 or whatever section it is of the Voting Rights Act, striking down these majority minority districts where you have under this law essentially unconstitutional racial gerrymandering, where the authors of this now law said you have a bunch of these areas that are majority black and they need their own representation. So they get their own district to elect their own black representatives. And maybe that's how BLM gets activated. When those majority minority districts get turned into reliably Republican districts, I think there's 27. I don't know. Actually, I take that back. I think there's somewhere between like 12 and 16 majority minority districts. And these are districts where they redrew the boundaries of the district to give the majority black population there, give them the opportunity to elect their own black representative. And you can be for it or you can be against it. Doesn't matter. It's clearly unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court, it sounds like, is probably going to rule against that. So the question is, how do you get BLM involved? Well, maybe you agitate and organize around that. Maybe that will reignite BLM. Because remember, we've heard from Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives. We're sitting this one out. We're not going to get involved in any of this stuff. Not yet, at least. So maybe they're saving it. Maybe we'll see them make a return in 26 and 27 when this happens. So at any rate, they're going to go barreling into the midterms. They're not going to win back the House, and they're going to say, this is it. They've stolen the midterms from us. They've removed our representation, and they have stacked the political seats against us. And this is it. This is the fascist government that we've warned you about. And now we've got to get active and we've got to save democracy, because this is really at this time. And it's another reason why 27 and 28 are going to be far more contentious years than we have seen so far this year. And it's been, it has been somewhat earlier this year was far worse. At any rate, let's move on here, because I want to play a video for you, a video that I saw last week, and this is from the Indivisible folks as well. This is from the Seneca Project, which is an affiliate. But one thing I've noticed, I first noticed this during the Democratic National Convention last year, where Democrats stopped burning American flags long enough to wave them. And they paraded the veterans on stage and they paraded the police officers on stage. And I said, this is a very, very different DNC than what we're used to having. And all of a sudden they were wrapping themselves in the flag and they're super patriotic. And I thought that was very odd. And I've seen a continuation here, because you look at the No Kings. First of all, No Kings is an inherently revolutionary phrase. No kings. We revolted against the king. We overthrew King George, and we established our own country. That's the first thing. Another reason to believe that Indivisible and this No Kings thing and all the other groups, another reason to believe they're revolutionaries, because they are invoking revolutionary imagery. And there's a Seneca Project video, and I'll play it for you right here. It's 44 seconds long. Playing it now.
We are together as one.
Yeah, I'm standing right here. I ain't got no fear, no fear, no fear. Whole world is watching and I hope we ready, Been through a whole lot, but we overcome.
People need to come together.
No kings, no kings.
I was waiting for this and now it's my time.
This is restoring my faith in humanity. We are stronger together.
We got the power.
I I love this country.
All right, so that was the hype video they produced for this thing last week going into Saturday. And I noticed that first image there, the first frame, it has a picture of George Washington. And then the next frame there is a picture of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And you've got all these white supremacist slave owners now that they're invoking. And I thought, that's really weird because they were pretty much toppling these guys as statues just a few years ago. And all of a sudden, they're their national heroes. That should be odd to everybody. And this is clearly, they're invoking this revolutionary sentiment. They're claiming this revolutionary heritage for themselves. Why? Because they're an inherently revolutionary movement. Also, I thought it was funny. Another one of those frames, I was like, hang on, that's a Civil War flag. Let me go back and see what this is. That's the stars and bars that was in this video. That's the first flag of the Confederacy. Apparently, they're trying to claim that too. And I just thought it was really funny because whoever made that probably thought it was the Betsy Ross flag, but it's not. It's the first national flag of the Confederacy. And apparently we can't have that one either. But that's not it. But wait, there's more. Have you seen these frogs? I think this started out in Portland where you have these people dressing up in these little frog outfits and to protest, or maybe they're throwing Molotov cocktails and bricks. I don't know what they're doing. At any rate, they just thought that was so fun. Oh, these frogs are showing up at this protest. And now everyone wear costumes. And we've seen banana costumes. And over the weekend, I saw a chipmunk costume. Saw some South Park character costumes. I saw there was a guy wearing a little frog costume. I don't know. They're wearing all these silly little outfits and stuff. And then the other day, I saw this indivisible poster with these frogs on there. And I said, are they trying to culturally appropriate Pepe? Are they trying to claim the frog for themselves? I know a bunch of Anons on social media call themselves frogs as well. And now we're seeing these frogs pop up all over the place. So I'm not 100% positive here. You remember probably a month ago, as soon as the folks at Indivisible said that they held an hour-long debate, choosing a color for this movement. I didn't know what color it was. I thought it was going to be purple because we saw the Clintons roll out in purple. And purple just makes a lot of sense because they can say, look, this is blue America and red America coming together. We're uniting against our common enemy, the fascists. And I think that's evocative. I think that's a winning message for them. Well, I won't say it's a winning message. It's a much, much better message than no kings. And even then you saw President Trump and some other Vice President Vance over the weekend share images of themselves in these regal monarchical outfits, wearing crowns and purple capes and whatever, and just making fun of the no kings thing. At any rate, as soon as they said we're about to come out with this color, I said, guys, they cannot have this color. This is a space that you have to contest. You cannot just give them free ground. And I said, if we can compete and try to own this color, then that would be a strategic blow to them. Because now there's competition for this color. And this is their unity color. This is their solidarity color. This is the color that is supposed to symbolize their entire revolutionary movement. And I just said, if you let them have that, it's just like, you're basically just giving them a weapon or giving them a tool and not contesting at all. I actually hate the color yellow. I don't want to see yellow MAGA hats. I don't want to see yellow anything. Maybe that's why they chose yellow. But I'm definitely not claiming any role in this whatsoever. But it is odd that when I said you got to start contesting that space for them, and now we're seeing them invoke our space, trying to culturally appropriate our heritage, which goes back to the revolution. I don't know. Can we get a status check and see if the last names Levin and Greenberg were in the Civil War registry? Anyone? Can someone look that up for me real quick? All right. So at any rate, they're invoking our revolutionary heritage now, and it belongs to us. Apparently they're claiming frogs now too. Someone shared this meme on a post. I thought it was pretty good. All right, so maybe, I don't know, reclaim the frogs. Maybe circulate that around. I don't know. All right, one other point I want to bring up here, and then I'll get to some questions because I do see we have a couple here. And actually, RW, this is a good point. The inflatable costumes could be intended to conceal. So I actually don't think that's the primary intent. I think the intent is to be silly and make fun. And now all of a sudden you've got video of a frog in an inflatable costume being arrested by police. And now you got your Daily Show, 15-second clip that you can propagandize with. I think that's probably the intent. But there was a question about could these costumes be used to hide, conceal weapons, for instance. And sure, that's a possibility. I hope not, but that's a possibility. All right, one of my favorite quotes comes from Randall Collins. He's a sociologist. He is, or maybe was. But one of the things that he wrote about is when we're looking at political warfare, tribal warfare, really, he says, I think if you go back in the book, in this section, I was rereading it the other day, he's actually talking about conflict between humans. But this is what he says, quote, "The best organized group usually wins, and that means the group with the most internal solidarity." And I've used this slide for a couple of years now, asking people when I go around and I give these talks about things. And I always ask the audience, are you the best organized group in this country? Are you the group that has the most internal solidarity? And the answer is almost always probably not. Or maybe sometimes I'll get an actual no. Most of the case, it's we're probably not. So I know a lot of people got a lot of mileage and made a lot of hay out of these No Kings protests being probably 75 to 90% boomers. It was probably 75% boomers where I live. And there is a Borg-like unity and level of organization there that I do not see very often on the right. I'm not even a Star Trek guy, but even I know what the Borg is, the Borg are. And they're the people that say, what is it? Assimilation is whatever they say. Basically, they go and they attack some ship and they basically take all the ship's personnel and they turn them into these little robot Borg people. And that's kind of very much like you look at the university system and these brains full of mush going through the university system. And it's total indoctrination. And they come out on the back end, these little robot cyborg people. Yeah, there you go. Resistance is futile. Thank you. So I don't want to overstate the importance of their internal solidarity. Remember, when we're talking about these types of organizations in resistance or insurgency or any form of revolution, there is a relationship between internal strength or internal solidarity and external power, which is to say, when you have it's like a balled up fist. When you have internal strength, when you're strong internally, you're externally powerful. And the reason that is because when you're internally strong, you have discipline and you have submission. You submit to the cause. You submit to the mission. And this is why when you have, I'll use the example of the British Army. And we'll say, like in India, for instance, you have the British military, which was much smaller than these Indian armies that they faced. But they were very socially cohesive, internally cohesive. They were highly disciplined, and they were willing to die. And in many cases, their opposing armies were not. And so when you have an army that's willing to die, that's highly trained, that has internal cohesion and solidarity and unity and discipline, they're going to be externally much more powerful than anyone else who does not have those things internally. And so on the inside, when you have members of an organization submitting to the cause, regardless of consequence, that is going to be a very powerful organization. When you have people who give up at the first sign of resistance, that is not an internally strong organization. And that is an organization that is going to fall apart and fail. So I do look at this, and I do see a lot of internal solidarity. And I look at the right, and I do not see a lot of internal solidarity. Maybe you have that in your small friends group, in your local tribe. I hope you do. But I would say at a national level, we don't have that. And that is one reason why we have seen the right disintegrated through economic warfare and public pressure campaigns and psychological operations, and I'm sure some version of COINTELPRO. Because these people do not want the right to be integrated. And that's why there's been such an effort thrown at disintegrating the right. At any rate, I was just looking through this, and I say, well, if a color revolution movement is going to succeed, then it has to be internally strong, internally disciplined, internally cohesive, internally unified. And what do you do? And you look at this color revolution, and it's a coalition of groups. And so it just stands to reason. If you want to break up a color revolution movement, then you have to attack its unity. You have to attack its internal strength. If you want this movement to be externally weak, you have to make it internally weak. And one way to do that is by pitting the segments of this coalition against each other. And I know there's been a lot of talk about pitting old versus young, because a lot of young people, they know they're not going to get Social Security, and you have a lot of old people who are still dependent on it. And so I think there's a pretty large surface area to cause internal division within this movement. And right now, they are all submitting themselves to the anti-Trump cause. But at some level, at some point, you do have to you have to create some dissension within those ranks and cause those groups to split apart, cause those groups to say, I don't want to work with those people. Yeah, we both hate Trump, but I'm not working with them. And once you cause that internal fracturing, once you disintegrate, I don't mean disintegrate like poof up in smoke, literally disintegrate this coalition, now they become internally weaker, so they become externally weaker. They're no longer a balled up fist. It's a loosely tightened fist, and it's not going to hurt as much when they punch you. Maybe break their hand too. So I want to get everyone cogitating on that. Think about that. Specifically, think about that where your local politics is concerned. What groups are in your area? And what is a message? Don't worry about the specifics right now. Just think about it. Where are the potential fractures in your opposing political camp? And if you don't know what those are, guess what? That's an intelligence gap. That's something you need to learn more about. And we do that through intelligence gathering, which is why I continually tell people, go to these low risk protests where you can just stand out there and talk to people and collect literature and identify the people involved, the individuals and the groups and the organizations involved, and map out what that coalition looks like, because this is going to be on the test in 2028, when this is a battle over legitimacy. If they do end up pushing the big red button, and we do actually see a color revolution in earnest being attempted, coinciding with a contested election, because this is exactly what it's going to come down to. So if you want to destroy a color revolution movement, you have to erode its unity and solidarity. And you can do that one way through pitting segments of the coalition against each other. Write that down and think about it. And if that means you attending, or if that means sending a member of your group to your county Democrat meeting, or sending them to a whatever political event they have to learn more, have someone join the party and learn about the cliques. If there I will tell you just personally, just getting more involved in my county GOP, first of all, it's a nightmare. But there, at the most recent county executive committee meeting, Our party chair spent the first 5 minutes talking about some little disagreement in the Signal chat, asking for a public apology from this guy who was sitting in the front row of the meeting. And I just thought, holy cow, there are deep divisions within this party at the county level. Those are the kinds of divisions. I'm not joking about that either. It was nuts. Those are the kinds of divisions that we need to be identifying in the opposing coalition, because those are rifts that you can exploit. So think about it. Local politics is always a nightmare. Vercingetorix says. All right. Guys, as always, these talks are brought to you by my Area Intelligence Handbook. If you want to get your area, listen, the area study is the very first step towards anything. Responding to wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes, what have you, riots. Everything starts with an area study. It's up on Amazon.com, the ebook version. I don't have any more printed copies because I'll be coming out with a second edition, expanded edition, sometime later this year or next year. At any rate, if you just search Area Study Book on Amazon.com, it'll be the first up, first book up. All right, with that, guys, let's go ahead and get to your questions, and I'll do a few minutes of Q&A, and then I got to bounce for the day. I've been seeing EBT threats all day. Do you think it's going to happen? Well, I think, to my understanding, they've got till November 1st to figure this out. And I know there's been some talk about maybe in the Senate voting to remove the filibuster, and so they could pass a continuing resolution on a simple majority. The problem is, if they do that, then if Democrats do end up somehow taking the Senate, then they're going to they will have a filibuster-less Senate. I think they probably will get it done. I think Kevin Hassett, actually, who's the head of the Economic Council, I think he said it would likely happen this week. They'd likely come to an agreement this week. We'll see. As always, if you put a Q in the chat next to your question, I will be able to see it more easily. Is the most effective thing to simply observe and take notes? Yes, absolutely. Observe and take notes and talk to people. There was a lady. So in the state of Texas, we have 17 amendment proposals on the ballot this year. And this lady held a sign that said, vote no on all 17 amendment proposals. And I was talking to her about that. And I said, oh yeah, it's just like Republicans to put something that important in an election year where no one's going to show up, like 2025. And yeah, her and her husband went off on Republicans. Okay, great. I'm listening. I'm seeing what they're saying. Okay. So yes, show up, take notes, collect literature, grab a couple friends. I had some local guys come with me, and I think it's probably their first left-wing protest. Certainly weren't dressed like left-wingers, but at any rate, I think even they learned, and we were talking to people, and just, yes, always be collecting. Anything else that is useful to do? Well, I volunteered and ended up giving these people the official count of the number of people at the protest, because they handed me the tally counter, and I literally walked up and down the rolls counting each individual. That's how I knew how many exactly people were there. Get on email lists if they have. Get a burner cell phone, and I'm not suggesting that you do that to duck from any national level intelligence. Just get a separate cell phone that is not, just get a different cell phone number that you can hand out. And if they have a text, they have like text alerts. If they have an email list, go get on that. Figure out how they publish information, and then make sure you get in front of that so you can consume whatever information they're putting out. All right, guys, looking for another question here. By the way, hey guys, listen. All this Israel stuff's in the chat. Listen, there's a million places where you can talk about that stuff. this is not the place to talk about that. I don't care what your opinion is. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. It serves no purpose here. We're trying to talk about intelligence and kind of high level preparedness stuff, preparing for the future. And I'm not trying to have a debate on whatever you're trying to debate. Honestly, I kind of don't care about any of that stuff anymore anyway. I'm just tired. I'm really, really tired of seeing it. Do they have this infrastructure because of all the money they stole from the taxpayer through USAID? Well, I don't think all of it, but when I talk about infrastructure, yes, websites, and there's some IT infrastructure. So websites, email lists, communications channels. But there's also human infrastructure. So there's basically cadres, and they call them freedom trainers. Has a nice ring to it. These freedom trainers, and they're trying to teach people these tactics. So yes, some of that has been funded, obviously, from USAID. Now that apparently most, or maybe all of that, probably not all, but at least most of that's been cut off. I think it was a bump in the road for them. Honestly, I don't think it's like you just see how many massive donations, hundreds of millions of dollars coming from these private donors into these networks. I don't think it's a showstopper for them. I'll say that. All right. Do you think these inflatable costumes popping up everywhere indicates how quickly and widespread new direct action tactics can proliferate? Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you can go to the Halloween store and for $30 or $50, however much these things cost, even $100. Yes. With social media, the velocity of information, you have messages can spread and new tactics can spread very rapidly. So yes, that's exactly what that is. Purple is an inherently royal color that would be absolutely ironic if they chose purple. Listen, when I say they should have chosen purple, I also mean to say they should not have chosen no kings. No kings is idiotic. Unless you just want to invoke the earliest revolutionary history of this country, then yes, no kings does make sense. Otherwise, I think they could have come up with a better message and gone with purple and said, look, it's purple. We're unifying red and blue against the fascist dictatorship, and they could have chosen purple. But they chose this really ugly yellow color. Helen says, I've seen an inflatable, I think, fart spray. Yeah, there was that video out of Portland where you do have that ICE or what customs, whoever he was, spraying the pepper spray into the ventilation shaft of that, the ventilation cover of that inflatable costume that guy was wearing. Well, listen, RW, and I hear this all the time. They say, but Mike, anytime the right wing tries to organize, you get FBI and you get, okay, all these things. All right. What's like that Batman slapping meme? Okay. Keep it sane, keep it local. One of the problems that I have seen for right-wing organizing is these people, they try to start these national level groups. And I look at the 3% movement, the 3%ers, as like a really good example of this, right? This guy's calling himself a colonel, and he's the head of the Threepers National United of America, and he's got 15 people in his group. And he's got a national level organization. And everything, Nassim Taleb talks about fractal localism. And we should adopt something similar, fractal localism. My best two pieces of advice, actually, they're not from me. They actually come from a guy named Steve Barry. He said, keep it sane, keep it local, which is about the absolute best advice I've ever heard in terms of running a local group. Keep it sane. You could say keep it sane, keep it legal, and keep it local. But fractal localism is where instead of having an overlap with a state, okay, so yeah, I could run a state level group, but you know what? El Paso's 12 hours away from me. I will never see people who live in El Paso probably in my life. I'll probably never go to El Paso. but yet we're in this state organization. It doesn't make sense to run state organizations. You should run a group in your own local town or maybe your local county. And instead of trying to network with other people across the state, network with people the next town over or maybe the next county over. And that makes a lot more sense than trying to run a state level organization or be a member of a state level network. It makes no sense. I mean, even Dallas, I'm 3 or 4 hours from Dallas. Even then, I never go up there. I will never run into those people. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon. It makes no sense for me to try to network with people in Dallas if that's not where my AO is. And I'm not talking about, sure, make political friendship, make political contacts and friends up in Dallas. If that's where you want to find some friends, that's fine. But in terms of trying to organize, it just does not make sense to try to organize with someone that far away with you. It should be your town and the neighboring towns, or your county and the neighboring counties. And you're gonna bite off more than you can chew, even trying to do that. So I think the big mistake that these people have made is trying to make these national state level networks, and they just do not work for us. It's a massive waste of time. You'll never come into contact with these people. It's your town and surrounding towns, or your county and surrounding counties. And that's pretty much it. Have you read Defense of Duffer's Drift? I have not. If the only consistent message is anti-Trump and Trump is gone in 2028, what's the plan going forward? I don't see. Well, that's the thing. It's the message has to transition. I think Trump's joking. I don't take him seriously or literally when he talks about Trump 2028. I think it's just a massive troll because I think Trump gets off on it, and I think he finds it very funny. And yes, it is kind of funny to me also. But it's a joke. It's a joke. The guy's obviously not going to run in 2028, number one. So obviously they will have to change their message. And the reason why I think this is going to culminate in 2028, I think there's probably like maybe 75-25% chance, 75% chance it culminates in with the election, is if a Democrat wins, they obviously don't need to run a color revolution. They won. They elected their guy. If a MAGA candidate wins, I think we will see a contested election. The challenge for them will be to credibly contest the election. And remember, this is a battle for legitimacy. They have to prove to the American people, or at least they've got to condition this belief, that a J.D. Vance or a MAGA candidate, whoever the MAGA presidential candidate is, unfairly won the presidential election, that Trump stole it for him, or that who knows how they're going to do this, or the way they're going to say it. I don't know. Maybe they're going to say that Trump messed with the voter rolls. I know the administration's been trying to get the voter rolls for all 50 states. And you've even had some Republican secretaries of state, like in Missouri, saying, we're not going to give you our voter rolls, which is their prerogative. That's their state. But I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but that is their challenge, to contest the election to a degree that the average American has doubt that a J.D. Vance or the MAGA candidate won. And at that point, when you have a plurality or majority of Americans who believe that the election was stolen, the next logical conclusion is that you remove the illegitimate president and you put the legitimate winner in there. And that's why everyone was so worried about what was going to happen between November and December and November last year to December 2024 and into January 2025, because that's when this transition integrity project, basically there was not an unfair assumption that maybe the transition integrity project would try to run something like that. But this is exactly how it's going to happen. You're going to have all these election watchdogs and NGOs and the transition integrity project, and I don't know, Americans for Free Elections and whatever other NGOs they spin up before them. They're going to come out and say, well, in our professional experience, I've observed hundreds of elections around the world. And in my case, this was obviously a fraudulent election. And when you have these people paraded on the news stations, and then when you have people in society, and you got basketball players and football players, and you got pop stars, and you got CEOs coming out and saying, this is not right. This election was stolen, and we've got to declare the right victor. All that stuff. And it's just going to be like this cascade of people calling for an election do-over, or calling for the Democrat, the rightful winner of this election, to become the president. And this is going to happen obviously before the electors, before December. So this is about how it's going to happen, I think, if it does happen in 2028. So at any rate, that's going to be their message. It's not necessarily going to be anti-Trump. It's going to be anti-MAGA candidate. It's going to be pro-free and fair elections. And that will be a challenge for them, I think. Why do conservatives seem unwilling to form more cohesive groups, fear of getting listed? Yeah, listen, guys, keep it sane, keep it local. Just focus on, go into your church. And one of the first things I did when we started going to our church is that I just asked a friend who was also a veteran. I said, who else is here is a veteran? Let's go have lunch with these people or invite them to lunch. I'd like to meet the veterans in this group. That's a really good place to start. Just keep it your friends group. You don't have to have a name. Don't make a flag. Don't call yourselves an army. Don't call you anything like that. Just, even if it's just a friends group, that's a really good network for the basis for organizing. And at some point when you're trying to I've been in my group chats here locally on Signal, texting people. I'm like, hey, come to our next political meeting or get involved. Who wants to come to this protest with me? Who wants to go do this with me? And that's a form of organizing. That's basically the beginning of political organizing, is bringing people from your friends group into the political fold and trying to activate them. So I would just say, if it's uncomfortable, if you don't want to, you don't have to put a name on it. Just get a like-minded friends network. And that's really the best place to start, best way to start. I think this is Cope. And Earl, no offense to you, but he says conservatives have day jobs. The opposition are all community organizers. Well, there is some truth to that, because, yes, we do have day jobs. And, yes, community organizer is a career path on the left, and it's not just a recreational activity. So that is a fair point. But, I saw on a lot of people commented on the post that I had on X, and they said, well, if I got paid $300 million, I could organize my friends too. Guys, there's way more than $300 million on the lines. There is your lives on the lines, and the lives of your children. I have a young child. The lives of your children are on the lines. You are on the line. You don't need $300 million. You got everything on the line. You have something of infinite value that's on the line. You don't need $300 million to organize. You just need to pull your head out of your ass and start linking up with friends and saying, if this happens, what are we going to do? Let's go do this. I don't care if you play board games, you go play basketball. Go do something with your friends. Start building those networks. You don't need money to organize. You just need to get up off your ass, put down the remote, and stop watching football and go do something outside with your friends. It's not complicated. And Earl, this is not directed at you. This is directed to the dumbasses commenting on my post on X saying, well, if we got paid to organize, then we could organize too. You don't need to be paid to organize. Do it for your kids. That's payment enough, at any rate. All right, guys, we'll do one more question here. Oh, well, this is an easy question. What are your thoughts on CERT training? Yes. Go join your county CERT group. That's your community emergency response team. And they will send you to all sorts of classes for free. They will send you to classes on all sorts of community emergency management stuff. Hazardous materials, CBRN, all sorts of stuff. Go through the free online classes and go take all those incident command system classes and go take as much of that stuff as you can. Do you think they will attempt another? I think someone will. I don't know who you mean by they, but that's a possibility. By the way, there is also the Lebanese, the Cedar Revolution happened after Rafik Hariri, their prime minister, was assassinated. So at least there's an historical precedent for that happening. You said your protest PRs would be, well, they weren't PRs. They're just collection requirements. Could you post them for non-members? I put them up on my X account, just a couple of them. Listen, if you don't follow me on X, it's just at Gray Zone Intel, gray with an A, at Gray Zone Intel. They're up there, and listen, before the next big national protest, there's probably going to be another one here in the next few months. Maybe they'll take the holidays and chill out. I don't know what their next plans are. I don't know. We got Veterans Day. We got some stuff coming up in November. Oh, and there's Election Day. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Maybe we'll see another national protest. When we do, I'll put it out on this channel or the show, which I do. I try to do every week on Tuesdays. Would you ever do a video with S2 Underground? Yeah, of course I do a video. I do a video with anyone as long as they're pushing the boulder uphill or pushing in the same direction. I'll do a video with anyone who's pushing in the same direction as me. Think the left will try to assassinate Trump? Yeah, I think they'll try. Of course, I think they'll try again. A lot of their organizing methodology goes back to Occupy Wall Street. A lot of their organizing stuff actually goes back to the 60s and 70s. I've got this massive trove. I scraped, there's an organizing website, and they had all these PDFs on there from before it was the Green New Deal back in the 60s and 70s. I scraped that entire website and got tons of PDFs, and I've been going through them. So yeah, it actually goes, it's funny. There was that thing. It's, actually, you want to give me, you're cool with 2 seconds. Let me look this up real quick. I want to show you an image. I'll put it up on the screen here for you, if I can find it. Here we go. Stages of a nonviolent action campaign. So this is like from the 70s. I think this PDF, let me get it uploaded here. Stages of a nonviolent campaign. Yeah, like 70s or 80s is where this came from. And stages of a nonviolent action campaign. All right. So it starts with personal preparations, spiritual, psychological, evaluation and testing. So one of the things, like you see this kind of with affinity groups as well. It's not, you don't just show up at the local bookstore and you say, hey, I want to join a direct action cell. You kind of got to work your way in, and there's a level of trust and familiarity that you build with these people. Remember, a lot of these people have known each other for 5, 10, 20 years. And so they know who's reliable, and they know who's really down for the cause. Actually, you want to know something really funny? There was this paper that was published back in 2004 in a law enforcement intelligence bulletin. I was just reading it a couple months ago. And they said one of the reasons why infiltrating Antifa groups is so difficult is because there's all these little nuances and little details that these revolutionary anarchists know that pretty much no one else does. And so if you show up and you say, oh yeah, I'm an anti-fascist, and yeah, I hate capitalism. And they ask you, oh, okay, explain to me the Marxist dialectic of whatever. And just, that's something that they all know. And probably no one else does. And so at any rate, not being well read and well versed in a lot of this left-wing literature is a pretty good sign that someone is either just starting out, i.e. not that serious, not someone you should invite into your inner circle, or someone trying to infiltrate, maybe. So at any rate, the spirit of evaluation and testing, it's like, you read these accounts of how motorcycle clubs operate, and you start out as a hang around, and you're basically like a pledge, right? And instead of making sandwiches at 2:00 in the morning for your fraternity, whatever, maybe you're delivering stuff, maybe you're committing small crimes. You're basically earning your way into the organization. So evaluation and testing is like making sure that the people who you may be operating with are actually down for the cause, and they're reliable, and they're not going to give you up to the cops, and they're not going to quit. They're not going to not show up. They're going to be committed, and they're going to be consistent. in what you do. At any rate, blah, 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 all these things. The other thing I want to point out here is issuing ultimatums. Demands are always a super important thing, because what they do is they issue demands. And when those demands are not met, now they have justification to escalate. They say, well, protest didn't work, and now we issued our demands and the protest didn't work. And now we've got to escalate to direct action demonstrations. We got to escalate even beyond that. And that's why direct action comes after issue ultimatum. Do this or we will escalate. And we have not quite gotten to the part where these groups are issuing ultimatums. We kind of know what their demands are, but they have not issued an ultimatum. But we're on the cusp. We're right there. We're pretty close for moving from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 1 is protest. Phase 2 is organized resistance, which is going to be things like civil disobedience and occupation, sit-ins, strikes, et cetera, et cetera. All right, guys. So at any rate, my point is, this does not just go back to Occupy Wall Street. This document was from the 1970s, and there it is. All right, guys, now I'll do the last question here, which is, do you think the left's tolerance can backfire as moderates associate the left with all the more unsavory wings that the left has to tolerate? Well, there definitely needs to be a much better effort to link left-wing violence with nonviolent protest. Because that's one of the places where these people draw moral authority from is they're nonviolent. And so that's why some of them want to be attacked by law enforcement, because they capture that on a cell phone video and they spread that around. And now that reinforces the narrative that they are the peaceful democracy, freedom loving protesters fighting against the authoritarians and fascists who are violent and beat peaceful protesters. And so that's a narrative that does have to be disrupted, in my opinion, if you're going to defeat any kind of color revolutionary movement. You've got to contest all these spaces, and you've got to contest the narrative. So when they come out and say we're peaceful, you have to counter that with, well, then why was there violence at this protest? Why did this happen? Literally, why was someone murdered at a June No Kings event, which happened? And if everyone's forgot about that, they swept that under the rug, and that's like ServPro, it never even happened. So I think there does have to be a much better effort to hold them to their own rules. That's something they do very well with conservatives. They're like, oh, you're a Christian, you can't do that. Or a real Christian wouldn't do that. Or a real conservative. That's not real conservatism. Real conservatives wouldn't do that. And we got to hold them to their own, make them play by their own rules. So if they want to invoke nonviolence, then this stuff actually has to be nonviolent. And it's just like all these videos where it's like someone said, it's always a nurse or a teacher. You know, there's that one lady, she's a public school teacher, and she was making like a gun motion to her neck, mocking Charlie Kirk. And okay, well, she's not attacking anyone, but you couldn't say that's nonviolent. Or, and then another one, oh yeah, there was this other lady, she was a nurse, and she was telling the ICE agents, I hope you better hope you never come in my emergency room, because I'm going to let you die, or something to that effect. Turns out she was a nurse, and she was immediately fired. So there needs to be a much better job done of exploiting that and showing that to the American people. Like, that's who these people are. Yeah, sure, they're pro-democracy, whatever. But if you better hope they never find out that you're a Trump supporter when you're at the ER and they decide they don't want to save your life anymore. You better hope. So at any rate, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways, and I'm not a PSYOP guy. I'm sure they could explain all this stuff far better than me. But that's that. All right, everyone. Hey, thanks for watching. That's going to do it for today's show. I appreciate your support, and I'll be back on this next Tuesday. Talk about some more stuff. Listen, the reason why I stopped doing Tech Intel Tuesdays and I'm doing Out Front with Mike Shelby, because I want to talk about some things that aren't directly related to intelligence. Sometimes I want to talk about cultural and other things. So RIP Tech until Tuesday. Welcome back Out Front with Mike Shelby. Everyone have a great rest of your day, and see you in the morning for early warning. Have a good day out here.